Hello, we continue our Inflectra Ninja sessions, and today we'll talk about how to run Salesforce tests created with Rapise in parallel. My name is Dennis, and I'm one of Rapise developers here at Inflectra. Today, I will describe how to configure parallel run of Salesforce tests that you created in Rapise. And during this session, we will not only review recommended configurations, but we will also run real tests using those configurations. And we will cover 5 typical execution scenarios. These scenarios are split into 2 major groups. The first group is related to a situation when your Salesforce instance is configured to allow user login just by entering username and password. And you can do this if you configure trusted locations in Salesforce. And this is actually the recommended way of dealing with automated tests in Salesforce. The second group is for those Salesforce instances when you need to enter some kind of code received by SMS or email for every new browser that logs into the system. So we'll start with the default case, which is most recommended. And in the second part, we will cover the situation when you have to enter the code for every new browser. If a user can log in into Salesforce just by entering username and password, then we may use default browser profiles in Rapise. Those profiles are configured in a way that when you run tests using them, they always create clean browser sessions. No cache, no history. We always start from scratch. And you don't need any special configuration for such profiles. So let's see how to do this in a demo. First, I will show you how to run tests sequentially, and then I will configure parallel run. I have a Salesforce framework in which I have 4 test cases implemented. They are pretty simple ones. This framework is already in Spira and linked to test cases in Spira. The framework configured in a way that if we do not specify a browser parameter, then the default browser profile to use for test execution is Selenium Chrome. So let's take a look at Selenium Chrome profile. I click ellipsis button in the top right corner of Rapise, and you can see that this Selenium Chrome profile has no additional configurations. So it's the default one. Just one argument here is passed to Chrome, disable notifications. But it's not related to a way how we run our tests sequentially or in parallel. So this is the default profile. It always creates a fresh browser session for running a test. So let's run our test sequentially first. So I switch to Spira dashboard, navigate to test sets, and here in the Salesforce folder, I have several test sets already configured. So we need Salesforce all tests. So let's expand this test set and see what's inside. Inside it, we have 4 test cases added. We specify no browser parameter at all. And the browser profile that will be used for execution is Selenium Chrome. So let's run our test set. To run, I will collapse the test set, expand the action column, and we'll choose execute. So Rapise launcher starts. I have my tests in a Git repository, so we see how Rapise launcher clones the repository to this local machine, and now it starts executing tests one by one. Just one browser was active during execution. It is now completed. Let's go to test runs. And here we see 4 last test runs that were performed sequentially. Let's now see how to do the parallel run. I switch back to test sets, navigate to my Salesforce folder, and here I have a Salesforce parallel test set. Let's expand it. So again, here I have 4 test cases added. No browser parameter specified, so we will use default Selenium Chrome profile. So to make the parallel run, I need to make sure that a few configurations are done with this test set. So first, every test case here must be marked as ready for parallel run. You can do this from test cases view. So you need to find every test case and expand action column for it and mark it for parallel run. If it is marked for parallel run, you can see this parallel sign. To run all those test cases in parallel, you need to scroll to custom properties of your test set, and here just set the run tests in parallel flag. So in my case, it is true. So by default, it is false. So when no parallel run is configured, there is no any icon against the test set name. If we set this to true, then we will see the parallel run icon. So we are ready for parallel run. I collapse the test set details, go to action and choose execute. Rapise launcher starts, and again, it should first clone Git repository locally, and then it will start the execution. You can see here in details section of Rapise launcher that it is running test set in parallel. There is a parallel word in brackets. So, and very soon we should see 4 Chrome browsers running and performing execution of our test cases. Execution completed. If we will go to test runs again, we will see our test runs of the parallel run. If your Salesforce instance requires your entering a verification code for every new browser that logs into the system, then you cannot use clean browser profiles for unattended automated tests execution. So in this case, it is required to configure permanent user profiles for Chrome. So I will show you how to do this. First, let's configure permanent user profile for sequential execution. I go to browser profiles section in Rapise, and I have a few more profiles already created. We will use Chrome T1. Let's see what are differences with the default profile configuration. I scroll it down, and the only difference here is args argument to Chrome. So here we can see that we pass user data dir parameter to Chrome, and here we just specify a path where to create the profile. When you install Rapise, C program data Inflectra Rapise temp folder is created. So we will use this folder as a base to create a permanent user profile for Chrome with name Chrome T1. In Windows Explorer, I have Inflectra Rapise temp folder opened. So far, it does not contain a browser profile, but it will be created automatically when it is needed. So I close this profile, just remember its name from T1, and I switch back to test sets section, expand Salesforce folder, and here we will use Salesforce all tests MFA test set. So let's expand it. It contains same 4 test cases, but here we specify browser parameter for the whole test set. So I'm scrolling here. There is a parameters section, and here we specify browser parameter, and we set its value to Selenium Chrome T1. And Chrome T1 is the name of the profile that we just reviewed a minute ago. And this profile will be passed to every test case included into this test set. Okay, so I collapse this section and we'll start execution now. It should use Chrome T1 browser profile. Execution completed, and we may review test runs. So here we can see 4 test runs, and for every test run you can see that we set browser variable to Selenium Chrome T1. So before running those tests on a machine that requires verification code for Salesforce, we need to run at least one test case with this profile on this machine, enter verification code, authorize this browser user profile to log in into Salesforce. And next time when we will be running our automated tests in unattended mode, we won't be prompted for verification code again. Also, we can go to the folder, to the temp folder that you configured for the permanent browser profile, and you may see that Rapise created a Chrome T1 folder. This is where we have our permanent Chrome user profile. Let's minimize this. Now we can configure and run these test cases in parallel mode. And we will do this in 2 ways. First way is we will create, configure 4 permanent browser profiles, and we'll assign every profile to corresponding test case. So I go to our browser profile section in Rapise. Here you can see that I already created Chrome T1, T2, T3, and T4 profiles. Let's switch to T4, and you can see here that Chrome T4 profile references Chrome T4 folder. So we will have 3 independent Chrome browser profiles. Why we need it? For parallel execution, we cannot use the same browser profile. This won't work. All tests will try to automate just one, the same browser instance. So this is why we need different profiles. I configured 4 of them. Let's now switch to test sets. Here I go to Salesforce folder. And I have another one test set here. Its name is Salesforce Parallel MFA. Let's expand it. It has same test cases added, but in this case, we define browser parameter for every test case here. To define a parameter for a single test case, you need to go to Action, Edit Parameters, and here you can do this on per test case basis. So every test case will be executed with its own browser profile, T1-T4. Okay, let's run it as well. I collapse the test set, go to Action, and press Execute. All test cases will now be executed in parallel. Execution completed. Let's review the test runs. Click in test runs link. And we can see that the last 4 runs are for our parallel test set. And every test run has its own browser parameter value from T1, T2, T3, and T4. It is worth mentioning here that for those profiles, when you use them for the first time, you also need to enter verification code manually. And then when those profiles are authorized to log in into Salesforce, you can run your automated test sets unattended. Let's now see how to assign user profile folder name dynamically. It requires more initial configuration, but pays off in the future. I'm switching to user.js file, and here I go to get WebDriver non-profile capabilities function. This function is described in the knowledge base of Rapise. The purpose of this function is to assign some browser profiles parameters during execution of a test. So not all parameters can be hard-coded before running a test. So some of them may be dynamic, and this is why we use this function here. So let's take a look at how it is organized. First, it works only if the profile name is from parallel. I'm going to all the profiles in my testing framework, and you may see here that Chrome parallel profile is created. I switch to this profile, and you can see that it is a default one. It has nothing special configured. All important parameters will be calculated during execution of tests using this browser profile. When you run tests in parallel in Rapise, so when Rapise launcher does parallel execution, it generates the variable gplayer thread and assigns it a number of a parallel execution thread for a test case. And this is simple number 1, 2, 3, 4. And using this number, we calculate the suffix variable here. And to this number, we just append T letter. So as a result, we will get here T1, T2, T3, T4 for our parallel execution threads for our test cases. And then we use this suffix to append it to the name of a folder to use for user profile in Chrome. And we simply assign this value to user data dir argument to Chrome. So pretty simple function. And let's now see how the execution looks like for this kind of configuration. I switch back to Spyro dashboard, test sets, expand the Salesforce folder, and the profile to use is test set to use is Salesforce Parallel MFA2. And here you can see that the browser here is assigned to Chrome Parallel. Let's expand this test set. And we can see that it has the same for test cases. And it has the parameter browser set to Chrome Parallel. Let's now collapse it and execute. Execution completed, and we can review test runs. So we have a browser set to Chrome Parallel, but every execution here uses a different permanent user profile folder. Let's expand this test run and see the details. I'm expanding the first one. And here I can see that it was the thread one, and the data folder used for browser user profile was from T1. Let's expand another one, for example, the second from the top. And here we can see that the thread was with number 4, and the folder used for execution was from T4. So browser user profiles were assigned by Rapise launcher for every test case dynamically and automatically. So this method of parallel execution requires more configuration steps, but is more easy to use than the previous one, when you had to assign every profile to every test case manually. Thanks for watching. If you have any questions, send them to rapise@inflectra.com mailbox. Bye-bye.